Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Badlands Book Club, where we are going through Chapter 7 of The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe, joined by Ash. And actually, Ash, your camera cleared up perfectly now, so there you go.
Oh, good. Fingers crossed it holds.
Ash was having some connection issues.
Well, yeah, yesterday, right before Culture of Change, all of a sudden my display got super weird. And I was, yelling at everyone in my family, like, who touched my computer? And they all claim no one did. But one of my monitors got like really weird outsized resolution. And I've been trying to get it to be normal again. I think I have it, but now other weird things.
The feds have hacked into your computer.
It's possible.
That's good. I gotta say, I'm a little bit angry, but at the same time, it's like a joyful anger at you.
You're angry at me?
Yeah, my house smells like pumpkin right now because my wife is.
Well, you should be happy about that.
I think that it's a joyful angry.
Yeah.
Like I know the debauchery that is about to occur when those cupcake, whatever they are.
So she talked about that on the show yesterday. The recipe is just a can of pumpkin and a box of spice cake. And I'm like, no, you need oil and eggs. And she's like, no, you don't. And she sent me a picture of what they look like. And they look pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, they look pretty good. I didn't know. I left and they weren't done. And then I came home and they were done. And now my whole house smells like pumpkin. And it's tempting. I'm starving now. I'm starving. All right, guys, we are going to get into Chapter 7 here. Before we do that, let's have Ash tell us a little bit about our good friends over at Goldco.
Is your wealth ready for Trump's next wave? Gold loves a Trump headline, and it's soaring. From the day he first took office, gold prices have climbed, gaining nearly $400 per ounce since his second term began. Why? Gold thrives in uncertainty. It's a time-tested safe haven, immune to government meddling, a shield against inflation, and a proven way to protect your wealth when the markets wobble. With Trump's second term heating up, will gold smash new records in 2025? No one knows how high it could go, but smart investors aren't waiting to find out. Take control today. You could even qualify for up to 10% in bonus-free silver. Discover an IRS-approved way to diversify your savings with gold and silver, tax and penalty-free. Get your free gold and silver kit delivered straight to your door and learn how to safeguard your future. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your kit and start building a stronger portfolio today. badlandsgold.com. Don't miss out. badlandsgold.com.
Wow. I just checked the price of silver, $44.37.
Wow.
That's huge. Yeah, that makes me really happy. I bought a shit ton at like $20, and I am very happy.
Like about actual silver that you hold, or like paper silver?
Physical silver. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. And as we start book club, it's always nice to curl up with a good book and a nice cup of coffee. And when you do that, make sure you're drinking Loaded Gun coffee. Did you know they're a veteran-ran, family-owned shop as well in Lake Havasu, Arizona? Every bag of their whole bean coffee delivers a high-octane, patriotic punch of flavor. With a long family history of commitment to freedom, every bag is a testament of pride and honor. From the skilled farmers who cultivate each blend to their roasters that handpick the finest coffee beans from around the world, Loaded Gun Coffee has mastered their unique brewing methods, resulting in the best-tasting coffee around. I 100% agree. This coffee is smooth and delicious, the perfect way to start your mornings. Get over to badlandsmedia.tv/loaded and use promo code Badlands to get 10% off your order. And if you're in Lake Havasu area, stop in to their newly renovated store and say hello. Tell them CannCon sent you. That is badlandsmedia.tv.
Ash sent you.
No, they like me better.
I sent you too.
Badlandsmedia.tv, promo code loaded. Stay loaded with Loaded Gun Coffee. Badlandsmedia.tv/loaded.
Tell them Ash sent you.
No, don't. Why would anybody ever do that? Why would anybody brag about Ash giving? No, I'm just kidding.
Where are we going with this?
I'm just gonna keep digging that hole.
We see a lot of that happening lately.
Yeah, I'm a hole digger. All right, so we are on. What happened?
GIs entering elderhood as senior citizens, I believe, page 180.
Correct. So 180, if you guys are following along, since this is GIs, I'll go ahead and start. Americans today bear themselves like victory-addicted champions, proclaimed Look magazine in 1965. They've won their wars and survived their depressions. They are accustomed to meeting and beating tests. For the generation then reaching peak power, one such test was to demonstrate that John Kennedy's assassination, however tragic, had not undermined its collective energy. Civil rights legislation provided the first trial. Through Kennedy's term, lost generation leaders like Everett Dickerson and Dixiecrat Richard Russell had succeeded in derailing integration. But now LBJ began muscling laws through. Yeah, LBJ was a huge racist. That was only the beginning. Lyndon Johnson's 1964 landslide trampled what remained of lost resistance. By 1966, the majority GI Congress was spending nearly as much money on education and healthcare in 1 year as earlier Congress had spent throughout the whole of American history. Man, does that sound familiar. In just a few months, the nation created everything from new transportation and housing departments to new civil rights agencies to Medicare and Medicaid. The great 89th Congress confirmed the GI's collective ability to build a great society, fight 2 wars, 1 cold and 1 hot, and reach the moon too, allegedly. As Eric Hoffer said of the Apollo program, these generational achievements mark the, quote, triumph of the squares.
Okay, hold on, because I have to tell you, today is allegedly the day that Neptune was discovered, September 23rd, I think 1846 or 64, I can't remember, but it'll be in my history thing today, and the date that's in there is correct. So it was founded, it was discovered out of the Berlin Observatory, which was funded and run by the Kingdom of Prussia at the time, and I think French astronomer that confirmed its existence said that its position was discovered as if by magic.
I mean,
Neptune is fake.
Yeah. To work as intended, though, the GI edifices required beneficiaries to behave as squarishly as they, but as the awakening progressed, younger people did not. Like B.F. Skinner, GIs sought to create a, quote, technology of behavior to design and build their way to social bliss. Yet, while GIs envisioned a well-behaved Walden II, the young insisted on acting out the more Thoreau-like original. Model cities, public housing became hotbeds of youth crime, welfare subsidized teen pregnancies, and tuition grants enabled students to riot when they might otherwise have had to hold down jobs. The launching of the awakening.
That sounds familiar.
A lot of this sounds familiar. A lot of it. Did you ever read Walden? Did you ever have to read that in high school?
If I did, I probably Cliff Notes it because I can't recall anything about it.
Henry David Thoreau. It's a weird book, Transcendentalism. The launching of the awakening produced a values clash then known as the Generation Gap. From hair to clothes to sex to music to tone of voice, everything about the new youth movement struck GI eyes and ears as divisive, passionate, and selfish. Just the opposite of the qualities this aging generation had come to admire in itself. In the late 1960s were thrilling for young resistors. They were intensely frustrating the GI leaders, many of whom had children in the resistance. Quote, everything seemed to come unhinged, James McGregor Burns. Something has gone sour in teaching and in learning, George Wald. I use the phrase soberly. The nation integrates, John Gardner. Having conquered half the globe as the young foot soldiers, GI leaders never imagined that a small regional war would pose much of a problem. The only 2 votes against the Tonkin Gulf resolution came from older lost generation skeptics, Senators Morse and Gruning. But once the war was on, neither the troops nor the home front behaved in a way that pleased Lyndon Johnson's generation, and quarrels between parents and children, between GI fathers and boomer sons especially, worsened by the year. As Vietnam wore on, this generation despaired that their prized federal government had become, in Nixon's words, a pitiless, helpless giant, no longer capable of doing great things. The old GI optimism began to ring hollow. Ultimately, the Bundy, Rusk, Rostow, McNamara controlled response strategy culminated in a controlled defeat. Alias Nixon's Nixon's Vietnamization. Ever since, polls have shown that GIs are far more likely than boomers to despise Vietnam's memory. I think everybody despises Vietnam's memory at this point. By the writing of this book, I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin was widely understood to be a false flag, right? Or not ever to have happened at all, actually, not even a false flag.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I think, factions of boomers that still believe what we did was righteous there.
Ooh.
They're
Ooh,
probably not very large at the
I
same
remember
time.
I remember my dad telling me in the 90s that, Vietnam was just nothing more than a cash cow for the industrial complex.
Was he in it?
No, my dad, he was a little bit too young for Vietnam by like 5 years.
Yeah, so my dad was in Vietnam, and in the 90s, he was very much still opposed to the opposition to Vietnam.
Oh, I'm opposed to the opposition.
I don't know where he's at now. He's never really talked about Vietnam. It was a source of great trauma.
I would be opposed to the opposition against the troops, but not necessarily to the politicians that
was the most I ever heard him talk about Vietnam, was what he experienced as a Vietnam vet at home.
Gotcha. Gradually, the full price of GI hubris was still to be paid. Watergate became the awakening's thermidor as two boomers, Woodward and Bernstein, exacted the generation gap's biggest trophy, Nixon's resignation in disgrace. The power was thus sapped from the national government, even if the White House would long remain the property of this aging generation. The ensuing congressional election led to the ouster of powerful GI committee chairmen and the enactment of countless new procedural entanglements that made big new GI programs impossible. Nor was this limited to government. After Watergate, GI industrialists constantly heard themselves accused of moral outrages against nature, women, minorities, the poor, and the deepest needs of the human soul. Wow. So I guess GIs were racist, misogynists.
It's really coming to life for me as you're reading this, because this saeculum, or the one that we're, I think, out of now, but just ended, and we're in the first part of the second one, I think, if my understanding of this is correct. The post World War II up to the 1960s is the first turning of the saeculum. So it's the high era, and golden age, baby. We're all like brand new future. We won, we beat the Nazis, we're all amazing. And we get into the 1960s, and you get into the awakening, where people are questioning the stories that they've been told by their parents' generation, the generation before that, and that leads into the unraveling, which I think is when this book was written. The unraveling period of towards the end of the unraveling period of the just prior or still current saeculum.
Are we putting the Korean War in with World War II in terms of GIs when we call them GIs?
Let's look at them.
Because I mean, we mentioned, we fought two wars, a cold one and a hot one, but Korea kind of goes by the wayside in there, I guess.
Okay, so what's the years?
52 to 56.
So the GIs, I think so. New Frontier, Great Society, Model Cities, War Down Through Vietnam, Watergate, Deficits and Problems with the Vision thing. Yeah, I think they fall in GI.
Sorry, Korean War was 50 to 53, although it technically never ended, but 50 to 53. I was close. I said 52, so I was close. Okay. Yeah. All right. Reading on. Gradually, GIs gave up arguing with the young, some agreeing with Milton Meyer that, quote, "we were wrong and the new generation is right," and never admit that. The awakening values regime flew in the face of their lifelong credo of optimism, teamwork, and community. But as GIs entered old age, agreeing with their kids could be construed as a sign of victory. Like George Bush later declared, this generation was inclined to, quote, "see life in terms of missions. Missions defined, missions completed." Once the awakening appeared irreversible, GIs could lean back and admit that they had indeed made life pretty comfortable, and that maybe it was time to let go a little. Together, GIs had lifted America out of depression and built a magnificent prosperity machine. Now, mission completed, it was time to claim a few trophies. As aging parents and bosses heard their children deride whatever remained of the high era culture, GIs saw no point in holding their ground. And so, bit by bit, they acquiesced in a pan-generational ethos of self-indulgence. The generation gap between GIs and their boomer children thus reached a lopsided truce. Boomers won the values debate and control over the culture, while GIs continued to preside over the institutional firmament and gathered a vast public reward. Quote, "You've already paid most of your dues, now start collecting the benefits," advised a brochure of AARP, an organization which, having shed its lost era reticence, now emerged as a leader of what Newsweek called the single most powerful lobbying bloc on the planet. From the early 1960s to the late 1970s, the membership of elder generations and the circulation of elder periodicals grew 60-fold, and their message shifted from the lost high-era self-reliance to a new notion of entitlement. After its beneficiaries began applying awakening-era tactics that Gray Panthers called the lifestyle of outrage, Social Security attained its present-day status as the third rail of national politics. Meanwhile, aging GIs provided the core of California's Prop 13 and other local revolts demanding and winning reductions in school taxes. Where lost elders were preferred to attack public spending and leave revenues alone, GI seniors wanted the opposite. Where lost elders had been overwhelmingly Republican, most GI elders were reliably Democratic. Fueled by the new senior lobby, and the last GI Congress spent the entire post-Vietnam fiscal piece dividend on their own peers. By the late 1970s, transfer payments from younger generations to GIs towered by a 10-to-1 ratio over what remained of Great Society poverty programs. This sudden elder affluence was an extraordinary GI achievement. Through the high, when the lost were old, elder benefits had fallen 20% behind wages. Now, what seniors receive from the U.S. government rose 15 times faster than average wages. Where lost elders had been the poorest generation of the high, GI seniors became the least poor generation of the awakening. From 1957 to 1976, the proportion of persons scoring very high on a test of anxiety fell by 1/3 for elders, while rising sharply for all other age brackets. 7 of the 8 GI soldiers said they were faring better than their parents had, while other polls revealed them as the awakening era's happiest and financially least troubled generation. Sounds like a golden age.
That's boomers, right?
No, the GIs are the ones that are seniors that are reaping all the benefits. The boomers are their kids. The boomers are the ones that they say can't afford
Got
shit.
it. Okay.
Younger generations didn't much object to paying taxes to support extra benefits for seniors because the money financed the latter separation, culturally, geographically, and familially. The new subsidies also induced GIs to vacate the workspace voluntarily as the youngest retirees in history. For the lost, the word retirement had connoted something you did with a worn-out horse. For GIs, it came to mean a 2-decade-long leisure world in relatively good health. Millions of retiring GIs separated into seniors-only communities, often far from where their grown children lived. Once there, they began showing a vigor and cheerfulness reminiscent of the high-era suburbs they had built in midlife. In Arizona's Sun City, observed boomer gerontologist Ken Deichtwald, "It's hard to find time to talk to people. They're too active and busy." In their new community, seniors could wall out the encroachments of awakening era culture. "Sun City is secure," said Deichtwald. "A resident may stroll the streets without fear of surprise, of unpleasantness, and unsightliness." A powerful generational hubris underlay his vast new senior edifice, no less than it did of Vietnam or the Great Society. Where GI Tomorrowland had once meant monorails and moonwalks, it now meant space-age medicine in the intensive care unit. As America's first elders to call themselves senior citizens, most GIs believed that their collective choices were necessarily good for all generations, that whatever they did to improve their own old age would also improve it for those who followed, if only the young would stay optimistic and be patient. But as often happened during the awakening, GIs
bootstraps, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just like we did.
Yeah. But as often happened during the awakening, GIs persisted in the earlier civic habits without the earlier focus on the future. Senior benefits exploded upward at exactly the same time workers' income started sputtering. The senior poverty rate plunged during the 1970s, exactly when the child poverty rate skyrocketed. It's almost like they were taxing the kids to pay the adults. Having inherited from their own parents an economy with vast excess capability just waiting for youth to harness it, GIs began to pass on their own children a fiscally overloaded economy unable to afford a new public agenda. Even as they let go, GIs continued to sustain their reputation and their self-image as active and competent achievers. In this, they were assisted by a new consensus about aging. Back in the high, an era valued physical energy. Most health experts believe that old people's bodily decline made them different and less productive than the young. That they had helped propel GI efforts to accelerate the elder loss exit from the workforce. Oh, that view, had helped propel GI efforts to accelerate the elders' loss exit from the workforce. In The Awakening, GI psychoanalyst Erik Erikson suggested that the correct elder role lay in generativity, as though old age were a productive, even procreative phase of life. What Betty Friedan later described as a fountain of age. With an upbeat new emphasis on successful aging, modern maturity refused to accept ads that suggested physical decline, and Robert Butler led an assault against quote-unquote ageist employees who associated elderhood with physical decline. By the awakening end, GIs had recoined the currency of old age. Never in living memory did America have an elder generation so politically and economically powerful, yet so invisible in the realm of culture and values. While GI seniors remained conspicuous as executives and treasurers for national institutions, they began having trouble with what George Bush would later call the vision thing. Their formative impact on youth was nearly nil, seldom extending beyond replays of the past, like old Honeymooner reruns or monaural big band sounds on AM radio stations. That's crazy. My grandpa used to listen to like nothing but AM radio. Hardly any seniors produced films, wrote essays, composed music, or delivered homilies for the benefit of younger audiences. In the GI's later years, even as the nation celebrated their heroic deeds in numerous World War II anniversaries, their irrelevance in the new values debate prompted the New York Times to ask, in large bold type, is anyone listening to the World War II generation? As their less affluent children struggled in the economy, GIs continued in their accustomed roles as their family's financial backstops. With the aging of GIs, cash transfers from elders to adult children nearly tripled after adjusting for inflation, and today accounts for an estimated 10% of all boomer wealth. But the grown kids who often had asked them for practical help seldom sought their advice on basic life directions. Many seniors grew troubled by what Dykewald described as, quote, a lack of respect and appreciation, in contrast to the deferential reverence they had once extended to their own missionary parents. Quote, in our time as children, grandparents were the teachers, advisors, counselors, end quote, roles from which Leshin said her GI peers were, quote unquote, robbed completely. Erik Erikson's wife, Joan, observed that, quote, when we looked at the lifestyle in our 40s, we looked to old people for wisdom. In the GI's own turn, she lamented, lots of old people don't get wise. In their final reflections, prominent GIs like George Kenman, Lillian Hellman, Eric Severiad, and Theodore White voiced distress over the steady loss in the American sense of community. Back in the high, when their generation ran the general issue culture, everything seemed to fit together constructively. Now, deep into the awakening, it didn't. In It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart despairs at the worthlessness of his life until an angel reminds him how, had he never lied, his town would have sunk into a corrupt, pleasure-seeking abyss. Returning home, Stewart saves his government-subsidized savings and loan thanks to gifts from young and old, repaying him for all the wonderful deeds that he once did. Like Jimmy Stewart, Awakening-era GIs were receiving their public rewards, yet, unlike him, they had to watch the society they so painstakingly cleaned up transform into something that he didn't like. The deal GIs struck in the 1970s looked good, but as the 1980s dawned, the long-term price became clearer. Despair comes hard at us, admitted Leshin, because it was unfamiliar in our growing. End quote. Yet by the end of the awakening, amid the golf courses and hospitals and their gleaming youth-supported sun cities, despair was precisely what many GIs began to feel.
I never really thought about It's a Wonderful Life from that kind of lens, because they show that, Pottersville is just it's capitalism run amok with no ethics, moral, community compass. And the end of the story, when it starts snowing again and we're back in reality, the problem is solved by everybody coming in and giving what's his name, George Bailey, paying his debt for him. The community comes together because that's so valuable. It's an interesting lens. All right. Silent entering midlife. Vicars of vacillation. During John Kennedy's funeral, Theodore White noticed that wherever one moved in Washington to participate in the grieving, one met young people in their 20s, in their 30s. Polls confirm that this tragedy left a larger mark on the silent than on any other generation. 3 months before, 250,000 Americans, mostly young adults, had marched on the Lincoln Monument to hear 34-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. speak eloquently of the dreams many of them shared. King, like Kennedy, enchanted a generation whose artists and intellectuals were just beginning to question the system to which they had so compliantly acquiesced. The loss of President Kennedy prodded the silent to demand more from what they called the powers that be. From the nonviolent activism of Medgar Evers to the folk songs of Joan Baez and the Kingston Trio, what some correctly labeled the civil rights generation tugged on the nation's conscience. Inspired millions of silent helpmates lent their expertise to expanding GI edifice and their sympathy to burgeoning youth movements. Soon, 2 more tragedies brought tears to this generation. This time, the 2 fallen leaders were the silent's own, King and Robert Kennedy, whom many felt then and now were the 2 best they had to offer. Afterward, there would be less residual hope and more regrets about what might have been. This generation would never again feel quite as uplifted by public life. During the awakening, the silent had few economic problems. Their prime of life incomes rose without interruption, spurred by a relentless demand for skilled careerists throughout government and business. By the late 1970s, the silent were old enough to ride out stagflation with relatively little consequence, and the SNL financed run-up in housing prices reaped huge windfalls for many of them. Except for divorced women who never remarried, every silent demographic category joined in the bonanza, making theirs the most upwardly mobile generation in American history. Yet their outer good fortune masked their inner turmoil. A search for catharsis, a sense of having missed out on the life cycle challenges faced by others. During the awakening, the silent became the stuffings of a generational sandwich, just younger than the can-do GI, yet just older than the self-absorbed boomers. Looking up the age ladder, silent felt more the faceless technocrat than the GI-style Superman, with what Tom Wolfe admired as the right stuff. Like Neil Armstrong, they made the small step enabled by the giant leap of their predecessors. Looking down the age ladder, they found themselves, in Howard Junker's words, quote, grown up just as the world's gone teenage. The silent felt tugged by contradictory agendas of 2 quarreling generational neighbors. During the ferment of the 60s, a period of the famous generation gap we occupied unnoticed as usual, the gap itself, Wade Green recalled. Lacking an independent voice, middle-aged people adopted the moral relativism of the arbitrator, mediating arguments between others, and reaching out to people of all cultures, races, incomes, ages, and disabilities. The tensions they felt helped them become America's greatest generation of songwriters, comedians, and therapists. The awakening sexual revolution hit the silent in an awkward phase of life, just when they had kids at home. This transformed them into Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, what Rose Franzblau described as a generation of jealousies and role reversals. Silent men felt claustrophobic, silent women resentful. Both sexes found a way to break free after asking what Benita Eisler termed the question that signals the end of every marriage. Is this all there is? From 1969 through 1975, as the silent surged into state legislatures, the number of states with no-fault divorce laws jumped from 0 to 45. While all generations joined the divorce epidemic, the silent showed the steepest age bracket rise and emerged with the deepest residual guilt. The midlife silent discovered Eros, with the zest that comes to those who have missed it in their youth. 40-ish men studied to become expert lovers, and liberated males pursued what John Updike called a post-pill paradise. Barrier-busting impresarios launched Playboy clubs, R-rated movies, and nude plays on Broadway. Looking up and down the age ladder for cues, silent men assembled a composite definition of masculinity. The result was a hodgepodge of role models who combined GI confidence with boomer sensitivity, Merlin Olsen, Carl Sagan, GI machismo with boomer judgmentalism, Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson, or a neurotic muddle, Alan Alda, Woody Allen. Others became America's first out-of-the-closet gay politicians, Harvey Milk and Barney Frank, celebrity transvestites, Christine Jorgensen, Renee Richards. Thus whipsawed, many silent felt like one of Gail Sheehy's subjects who wished, quote, somebody would let me be what I am, tender sometimes, independent too, but also vain and greedy and jealous and competitive. Many silent women resented having allowed themselves to become Stepford wives, limited to household chores and childcare while their husbands' careers soared. And many looked more skeptically upon vows of fealty in an era when many midlife married men succumbed to what Barbara Gordon called Jennifer fever, an attraction to sexually liberated younger women. The youngest and most married female generation in U.S. history began prefixing themselves with Gloria Steinem's status-cloaking Miss, while 40-ish divorcees began commanding media attention, demanding legal equality, and starting midlife careers. Adopting the younger boomers' assaultive oratory, silent feminists like Kate Millett and Susan Brown Miller and T. Grace Atkinson attacked man the oppressor for being a natural predator driven by metaphysical cannibalism. The gender role partnership that had once satisfied midlife GIs was now in total shambles.
It sounds to me like maybe the old classic feminist is misconstrued.
Well, yeah, and it's the silent boomer together, elder and younger, kind of part of the same issue transformation, I think.
Way to go, silent boomers.
Yeah, silent/boomer. Where was I?
Top of 187.
Okay. As middle-aged men and women began shattering conventions and taking more career and family risks, switching spouses, changing careers, dabbling in therapy, the midlife passage entered the pop lexicon. Ever since silent authors Daniel Levinson and Gail Sheehy discovered what the latter called this, quote, refreshing life cycle event. Nearly everyone who has written about it has belonged to their generation. By the height of the awakening, many silent look back on the high and felt with Bob Dylan, quote, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. As William Styron remarked in 1968, I think that the best of my generation, those in their late 30s or early 40s, have reversed the customary rules of the game and have grown more radical as they have gotten older. A disconcerting but healthy sign. In Future Shock, Alvin Toffler developed a new transience index that quantified the breaking up of human relationships. Thanks to Toffler's own peers, that index shot upward through the latter half of the awakening. While Daniel Ellsberg and Joyce Brothers pushed to get more secrets out, Phil Donahue and Ruth Westheimer pushed to get more talk going, all in the hope that more data and dialogue would somehow build a better society. As rock stars, graduate students, and draft counselors, the Silent mentored the awakening culture and founded the dissent groups boomers would later radicalize. Like attorney Sam Yasker, who coaxed his farmer father to lease their property at Woodstock for a youth festival, the Silent drove the magic bus while the boomer kids frolicked. Yet for all their sympathy, the Silent never fully welcomed the raging youth culture. The phrase "never trust anyone over 30" was coined by Jack Weinberg, a Berkeley postgraduate who was himself approaching that age. "It's hard to be hip over 30, mused Judith Viorst, writing poetic odes for a generation that had once felt born too late, but now felt born too soon. Still craving respect from GI elders, the Silent tried to convince boomers that they understood them and could help channel their anger. From the exhortations of Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X to the lyrics of Simon and Garfunkel to the psychedelic art of Peter Max to the Motown sound of Berry Gordy, Silent activists and artists lent expression to youth fury. That was a really long sentence. As Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin became Pied Pipers of revolt, quote, "We knew we couldn't get Archie Bunker, so we went for Archie Bunker's kids," said Hoffman. "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children, say them now." The Silent began lamenting their own missed opportunities in youth and rethinking their capitulation to GI culture. The new academic stars heard themselves derided by George Wallace as pointy-headed professors who can't ride a bicycle straight, by Spiro Agnew as nattering nabobs of negativism and vicars of vacillation. Yet if Silent lacked the GI's punch, they knew how to press the procedural buttons that would bring GI authority to its knees. The Chicago 7, Harrisburg 7, Camden 17, Seattle 7, Kansas City 4, Evanston 4, Gainesville 8, the Pentagon Papers 4. From one trial to the next, these mostly silent defendants and lawyers kept beating the system on technicalities and walking away to argue again. By the mid-1970s, many a middle-aging ex-helpmate was sabotaging the GI-built civic order with what Russell Baker termed a giant and progressive power failure. Ralph Nader launched the opening salvo against GI-style mass production by attacking American autos as unsafe at any speed, having delivered death and injury and the most inestimable sorrow and deprivation to millions of people. American cars. That was what that was about. Silent legislatures enacted new layers of process that Silent lawyers skillfully used to snare corporations or governments in new definition of wrongdoing. From 1969 to 1975, the number of American public interest law centers quintupled. I wonder how it compares to now. I bet it's more now. During those same years, the Silent began dominating jury boxes and awarding huge pain and suffering damage awards, creating chaos in the old GI insurance paradigm. Whatever the verdict, then came the appeal. In the Silent midlife mindset, nothing could be declared final. Any outcome was subject to doubt or reinterpretation. All across American society, the midlife Silent wanted to make life like football's new instant replay, where anybody could check upstairs to get any decision reviewed or any contract renegotiated. Boy, that sounds like it never ended. It only got worse. On the field, a generation that had once manned the last clean-cut sports dynasties, Packers, Yankees, Celtics, now provided the lonely challengers, John Mackey, Curt Flood, and lawyer agents who taught young players how to assert their rights against older owners. Having reached the...
This Silent generation doesn't sound very freaking silent. They sound pretty damn loud.
Yeah, I think the silent part is that they didn't tell us about them.
Right?
We're gonna be silent about this. Hopefully, you guys forget what we did.
The communist infiltration.
Yeah, I mean, boomers get a lot of hate, right? But like, Silent seems to be just kind of like walking away whistling.
Yeah, Silent. You guys kind of suck. No offense, but.
Having reached the age when GIs had earlier taken charge, the Silent now resisted the idea that anybody could and should assume GI-style leadership. Instead, they applied a lower-key brand of civic skill. They plumbed inner well springs older GIs seldom felt, while maintaining a sense of social obligation that boomers seldom shared. Their solutions, fairness, openness, due process, reflected a keen sense of how and why humans fell short of grand civic plans or ideal moral standards. Toffler said America was in a midst of a historic crisis of adaptation and called for the moderation and regulation of change and exact scientific knowledge expertly applied to the crucial, most sensitive points of social control. Wow. Silent appeals for adaptation did not arise from GI-style secular power or boomer-style spiritual fury, but rather from a self-conscious humanity and a well-informed social conscience. In politics, other directedness made this generation Paul Songas describes as much more questioning than its predecessor. As silent legislators displaced GIs in the latter half of the awakening, they produced, says William Schneider, a highly intellectualized political culture that respects expertise and competence, and the administrative state was born. The silent swept into office in the Watergate baby election of 1974, a year remembered by Tim Worth as a pivotal point when America entered the most post-industrial era, the information age, and the era of human capital, when states, rather than the nation, would be laboratories of democracy. After they attained a majority of America's congressmen and governors in 1977, the main preoccupation was to prevent big institutions from doing bad things to everyday people. They did this by writing impact statements, reviewing market externalities, designing flowcharts, holding hearings, setting up oversight committees, and airing government secrets. In the business world, the silent similarly challenged the GI-style pyramidal structure with a newly decentralized M-form corporation. Where midlife GIs had disliked diversity, the silent resonated to different strokes for different folks. In the eyes of this least immigrant generation in New World history, America was less a melting pot than a salad of unblended immigrants. Multilateralism and interdependence came to dominate foreign policy debates. A new academic elite applying the counter-chauvinist Pogo principle, quote, "We have met the enemy and they are us," concluded that America might have more to learn from other societies than the other way around. Meanwhile, life became more complex and gourmet, much to the delight of a generation that had grown up with 3 network TV and Wonder Bread. Thanks to this silent spawned ambivalence, uncertainty, and complexity, building powerful new things like Three Mile Island nuclear reactor became difficult or impossible. Once productivity stagnated, any response was rendered problematic by silent thinkers who, like Lester Thoreau in Zero-Sum Society, observed that improving the condition of one group now had to come at the expense of another. As the Club of Rome called for limits to growth, Jerry Brown announced that America was reaching the outer limit of our potential. The age of limits became what William Schneider termed the zeitgeist theme of his generation, where midlife GIs had done great things and felt astride history, where young boomers were satisfied to look within themselves. The silent took great things for granted and looked beyond themselves while worrying that history was passing them by. They became keen on manufacturing points of life cycle reference around personal, not historical markers, transitions having little connection to the larger flow of events. Like Elvis, a generation now squarely in midlife was wondering if I've spent a lifetime waiting for the right time. Struggling to break free from their early life conformity, the silent wanted to turn themselves loose, not to build big things or preach big truths, but to get themselves and others to open up, mingle, relax, relate, express, and just unwind a little.
The weak men generation.
New villain just dropped.
Yeah, silent generation. You guys.
Silent generation was an artist generation, so that fits. Born 1925 to 1942. Grew up as the suffocated children of war and depression. They came of age just too late to be war heroes and just too early to be youthful free spirits. Instead, this early marrying lonely crowd became the risk-averse technicians and professionals, as well as the sensitive rock and rollers, civil rights advocates of a post-crisis era in which conformity seemed to be a sure ticket to success. I mean, I think we've been hating the wrong people.
Adam Chester,
It
my
was like
nut.
every bad thing that we're pissed about now, the idea was born in the silent generation.
I should say Admiral Chester, my nuts, not Nimitz. That is very disrespectful to a great admiral. Says the silent took us to the moon. Yeah. Okay.
And found Neptune as if by
And
magic.
found Neptune. All right. Boomers entering young adulthood, mystical militants. I am a student. Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. Read the signs of picketers outside Berkeley's Sproul Hall in 1964, mocking the computer punch card treatment the faculty was supposedly giving them. Where earlier student movements had been the work of a lonely and polite few, this one swarmed and raged. The free speech movement rioters despised the life of sterilized, automated contentment that America's intellectual and moral wastelands were preparing for young graduates. As Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction shot to the top of the pop charts, students at Berkeley resolved to throw our bodies on the gears to stop the GI machine. Within a few years, America's finest universities were, like its inner cities and military depots, awash in youth violence. Often the trouble started when administrations tried to clear a park or erect a building that would benefit students. Instead of praise, the GIs heard screams like Jacob Brockman's, "You build it up, mother, we gonna tear it down." Wealthy kids dressed down, donned unisex styles, and became self-declared freaks, as if to reject the affluence and civic order of their elders. Back in 1962, the silent founded Students for a Democratic Society, promoted social interchange, and considered violence abhorrent. By the late 1960s, a radicalized SDS screamed at the pigs who tried to keep order, while youth violence became what Rap Paul Brown called as American as apple pie. In 1970, 44% of college students believed that violence was justified to bring about change. That's all too familiar. The clenched fist became the emblem, T-shirts and jeans, the uniform and corporate liberalism, the enemy. Who are these people? Asked Daniel Moynihan, then on Harvard's faculty. I suggest to you they are Christians arrived on the scene of the 2nd century Rome. Man, this sounds familiar as well.
Yeah, and that's that's encouragement. Right, like that. What that Harvard professor Daniel Moynihan is saying is they're Christians arriving on the scene of the 2nd century of Rome, meaning, well, they've taken what was supposed to be and perverted it, and they're pissed about it, and that's why they're burning stuff down. And that's the same message that we hear today, right? What was it that Miss Potato Head looking one said? There needs to be violence in the streets as long as there is violence in our lives. Many of them have said, don't stop, can't stop. We've got to keep, people have to get loud and angry. And that's at the time those statements were made was when 2020, they were burning down fucking cities.
But this is like so I've read quite a few books on, the pretty much the 30s to the 70s and the slow quote unquote communist infiltration, the Frankfurt School, those kinds of things. And like, this doesn't sound like a natural turning. This sounds like, an infiltration brought on by the OSS/CIA, and eventually the FBI. Well, the FBI was quote unquote trying to root it out, but while the CIA was allowing it to infiltrate through MI6 and other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the central planners and manipulation and control are probably there throughout the turnings. The CIA is called something else in Washington's era, but there was still forces at play. Prussia was active back then. But I think it's interesting that what we're reading about the boomers right now in the 1960s, when they were entering young adulthood, heading into their second turning of life, is the same shit that we're hearing from old boomer professors in academia right now.
Yeah. They're trying to,
So maybe they were manipulated into holding the positions that they hold, but it's stuck.
Yeah, but so I think the boomers had more influence on not the generation that's coming out of college right now. I think they're actually pretty based. But the generation, pretty much our generation, and I think we were at the beginning of that. The latter half of our generation, Christy's age and her brother's age, in their mid 30s and early 30s, they're very much like this we're reading right here. And I think
so, like boomers.
yeah, like I think the influence from these professors and these professionals at that time, I don't think it's having the impact that it has on this generation currently, but my generation, our generation, millennials and into, I guess it would be Gen Z. I think
Yeah, it would
ha-
be Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha
yeah,
is
I think,
after that.
and it's appropriate named Alpha because I think that it's a beginnings there.
And Christy's generation is the millennial one.
I'm a
And
millennial
then,
technically because I'm at the very, very beginning, 1983.
yeah.
But I mean, that's like it's like being
But
what
like Caleb is Gen Z,
yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
didn't they say at some point in here that the two, like if you're looking at it like a circle, the two that are off, that are diagonal from each other, mirror each other? And in that case, the mirror of boomers would be the millennial generation, and the mirror of Gen Z would be the Gen X generation. And that seems sort of right to me. Feels
I don't know.
consistent.
I think the millennials are.
It's the heroes mirror prophets and nomads mirror artists thing, I think.
I think I think the millennials more align with the GIs, and not just because we fought in a 20-year war, but also because I think we were builders. And if you look at the advances we've seen over the last 20 years, a lot of that is from millennials.
But the millennials and the GI don't exist in the same constellation, the same generational constellation. The GIs have died off by the time the millennials are in the constellation. I'm looking at it right now.
The GIs were in their 20s in the mid 40s, right?
The GIs
were in the mid because they fought World War II. That's where the
right, born by 1924, so 20s.
So if you look at like the 90s and the early 2000s, they're in their 80s. They're between their 70s and 80s.
The older GIs are all dead. I mean, there's probably a couple that are over 100, but aside from those couple, they're probably all dead. And then the older GIs, as millennials were being born, would be 80 to 100.
No.
Yeah, that's the at the time, because GIs are 1901 to 1924. So the youngest GI.
Millennials are what? What do they define millennials as?
Hero.
No. Excuse me. Timeline.
1982 to question mark.
Okay, well, yeah, that's because we don't know
this
when
was
it ends.
Written in 97.
So if you figure GIs are in their 20s and the 40s, 40 years, they're in their 60s when millennials are beginning in the 82, 83, and then so they're in their 60s. I think there might be some influence there, and I don't know. All right, let's keep going here.
They're both heroes, so that's that. But my point was the generational constellation of the four, where you have millennials entering early life, you have the boomers as the older generation, the elder. You have the boomers at the fourth, the millennials are at the bottom. The one right before the boomers is GI, and so the GI heroes and they're both heroes. Right. So you're not wrong. They have similar characteristics, millennials as GI. But in terms of in the constellation, the one that mirrors, millennials mirror boomers, I think, in the actual constellation, the way that this is set it up.
All right. In Do You Believe in Magic, Annie Gottlieb declared the boomers, quote, a tribe with its roots in a time rather than place or race. For her peers, that tribe, that time was in the 1960s, alias the Awakening. Born as the inheritors of the GI triumph, boomers came of age as what Michael Harrington termed mystical militants, whose mission was neither to build nor to improve institutions, but rather to purify them with righteous fire. America's new youths, observed Eric Erickson, were engaged in a search for resacralization, where silent youth had come of age, eager to fine-tune the system. Cutting-edge boomers wanted it to burn, baby, burn. They had been raised to ask fundamental questions and apply fundamental principles. Among young radicals, Keniston noted the great intensification of largely self-generated religious feelings, often despite a relatively non-religious childhood. This search for spiritual perfection was often aided by mind-altering drugs, which the Aquarian Conspiracy's Marilyn Ferguson described as, quote, a pass to Xanadu for spontaneous, imaginative, right-brained youths. Boomers sought to be together people, not together like the GI uniform corps of the 1930s, but together as a synchronous good vibration. Boomers perceived their generational kinship as what Jonathan Cott called, quote, the necklace of Shiva, in which every diamond reflects every other, and is itself reflected. Where silent beatniks and it had expressed angst in poetry, earnestly seeking audiences, boomers hippies megaphoned their non-negotiable demands without much caring as to who listened. In the new youth culture, purity of moral position counted most, and verbal terrorism silenced those who dared to dissent from dissent. Organization counted for little. Keniston noted how the young radicals of the 1960s, having grown up with feelings of loneliness, solitude, and isolation, were profoundly mature by measures of ego strength, yet childlike in their social skills. Where silent nonconformists had feared blotches on their permanent records, boomers perceived very few real risks. Amnesty was often the student strikers' first demand, and usually it was granted. More important, a supercharged economy was offering careers to all comers. Most campus rioters assumed that the instant they deigned to do so, they could drop back into the American dream machine. Planning for tomorrow was no big deal. Did boomers expect to find better jobs, make more money, and live in better houses than their parents? Certainly, recalls Robert Reich of his student activist days. That is, if boomers wished it, and maybe they didn't. Pervasive affluence also meant that class conflict counted for little. Unlike the socialist old left, the boomer new left pressed moral and cultural, not political economic causes. As Irvine Howe noted, boomers radicals differed from the GIs of the 1930s era facsimiles in that they asked, quote, how to live individually within the society rather than how to change it collectively. Given how little the youth rage hinged on economics, many leading radicals were themselves children of the elite, a Patty Hearst syndrome that terrified elder GIs. Nor was the thirst for confrontation limited to the student elite or radical left. Arrayed against the Ivy Leaguers who occupied administration buildings and young blacks who set cities afire with the like-aged police who clubbed them and the like-aged National Guardsmen who fired on them, in the 1968 election, non-college white boomers were twice as likely as their older counterparts to vote for George Wallace. The generation gap was fundamentally a boomer revolt against GI fathers. Most sociologists who studied awakening-era student radicals were struck by their attachment to mothers and their ambivalence, Keniston, for the Oedipal. Well, I'm trying to think of Oedipus Rex, Oedipal. I don't know. Rebellion, Malcolm.
It's Oedipal.
Okay, Oedipal, rebellion, Malcolm, or attitude of parricide, Louis Fuhrer, toward male authority. The most memorable youth symbols were direct affronts against the construction of GI men. From the two-fingered peace taunt adapted from the old GI V for victory, to the defiant wearing of khaki, the GI color of uniform teamwork, and the desecration of the American flag. The emerging boomer agenda was a deliberate antithesis of everything the prototypical GI male had stressed during the high. Spiritualism over science, gratification over patience, fractiousness over conformity, rage over friendliness, negativism over positivism, and especially self over community. One wanted the young to be idealistic, said Irvine Christine, and wrote at the time, perhaps even somewhat radical, possibly even a bit militant, but not like this. The most overt cause of youth frenzy was the Vietnam War, a threat that was generally avoidable for those who actively sought a way out. Only one of every 16 male boomers ever saw combat, and 10 times as many committed draft law felonies, mostly failure to register, as were killed in the war. The war's dodgeable draft created festering class and race divisions between boomers who fought in Vietnam and those who didn't. Combat offered little glory for young soldiers. The most celebrated war heroes were GI POWs like Jeremiah Denton, while the most publicized boomer soldier was the murderous William Calley. On film, John Wayne's Get It Done Green Beret fit the GI's Vietnam fantasy, while Sylvester Stallone's Blow It Up Rambo fit the boomers. Coming home, young vets faced more opprobrium from peers. I don't know.
I think that's right. Opprobrium
from peers than any other ex-soldiers in U.S. history. Yet until the May 1970s shooting of 4 Kent State students, most boomers did not believe the Vietnam War was wrong, only that it was badly led. After Kent State, though, youths nationwide erupted into days of rage as students at hundreds of colleges went on strike. Campus unrest led the polls as America's number one problem, leading older generations to give boomer views a bigger hearing. Prior to the 1972 election, 18-year-olds were awarded the vote, and were awarded the right to vote. And the number of under 30 delegates quadrupled at the two parties' political conventions.
I'm sorry, Brian, there is no right to vote.
You sound like CannCon.
And Kansas Supreme Court.
Having hounded Lyndon Johnson out of office and having poisoned the campaign of his chosen successor, Hubert Humphrey, boomer zealots proceeded to turn on Richard Nixon. Even the presidential candidates who courted young supporters invariably saw their campaigns get wrecked on the shoals of this generation's weak civic instincts. In one anti-establishment election challenge after another, boomer interest surged briefly before weakening by election day. In 1972, a year in which nearly 25 million newly eligible boomers were expected to turn the tide, they did not. #election fraud. Half failed to vote, and Nixon outpolled McGovern among boomers who did. By then, the war was winding down, the new draft lottery was kicking in, and boomers began heeding their Beatle mentors' simple words of wisdom, let it be. The rest of the 1970s were studded with successful candidates like Ronald Reagan and S.I. Hayakawa, who launched their political careers by running against the youth culture. As the anti-Vietnam fever cooled, the economy became an issue with boomers for the first time. In and after the 1973 recession, entry-level jobs became hard to find, and the euphoria of the early awakening disappeared in a drizzle of sex, drugs, underemployment, and what Lansing Lamont called the lost civility on campus. The GI-built world suited boomers no more now than it had in the heyday of Vietnam, and with the economy souring, many boomers, post-anti-warriors, found new reasons why money-making was beneath them. I have made no plans because I have found no plans worth making, a Dartmouth valedictorian declared to the cheers of his peers. Like Mitch Snyder, who abandoned his own children before leading a crusade for the homeless, many boomers spent the 1970s believing, if it doesn't work, I just kind of move on. This manifested itself in a sudden sharp resistance against permanent linkages to mates, children, and professions. Like Catherine Ross in The Graduate, boomers approached the altar or corporate ladder and heard something inside scream, stop. Having jammed the gears of the silent era treadmill, boomers wandered off to do what they wanted to do. The self-absorption of young boomers lent their generation, male and female, a hermaphroditic pistil and stamen quality. In the singular generation, Wanda Ubranska exalted their self-sexuality. Having grown up when gender role distinctions had reached a zenith, boomers set to work narrowing them. Men ventured into values domains that in the high had belonged to GI mothers and teachers, while boomer women invaded the careerist roles once reserved for their GI fathers and providers. This made boomers more independent of social bonds, yet also more open to emotional isolation and economic insecurity. Unlike silent women, many boomer women worried from the outset that early marriage might actually depress their future household standard of living. Through the latter half of the awakening, boomers actively crafted new concepts of self-religion. Secularists heralded the new age and asserted a sovereign right of self-discovery. In the human potential movement, billed as a reaction to industrialized, mechanized thinking, large numbers of boomers dabbled in psychic phenomena and experiments in communal living. Meanwhile, a new breed of Jesus freaks and born-agains returned the Calvinist notion of calling to its original emphasis on an inspirational rebirth. From New Age fellowships to Southern Baptist churches, believers no longer had to spend a lifetime engaged in GI works to achieve salvation. In their daily lives, young adult boomers began testing their powerful inner concepts on the outer world. As they retooled the American economy by insisting on meaningful, read, un-GI careers and products. America's decades-long productivity surge came to an end. Boomers had little desire to produce or purchase the cars or furniture that looked like their neighbors. In pro sports, free spirits like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Reggie Jackson, and Joe Namath introduced the inner athlete and an era of declining loyalties among athletes, teams, cities, and fans. In their hobbies, boomers did everything with an intensity others found obsessive, from exercise faddists looking for the runner's high to diet faddists looking for alpha waves. In the marketplace, consumer brand loyalties weakened, and Made in the USA became passé among the cognoscenti. By the early 1980s, Times Mirror surveys developed a new values and lifestyles typology that helped help advertisers reach such new boomer types as the I am me consumer. Toward the end of the awakening, when boomers began reaching the higher councils of governance, they immediately asserted a new inner world agenda. Hamilton Jordan and Jody Powell helped equip Jimmy Carter with a revivalist vocabulary, and David Stockman, Ronald Reagan's principled budgetary executioner, was the first of many boomers to enter public life after a stint at seminary or theology school. Rock promoter Bill Graham once recollected that among the young radicals of this era, there was very little doing. Instead of building or improving things like the GIs or Silent at like age, boomers pursued more of an expressive agenda. Like Hillary Clinton in her Wellesley valedictory speech, they were intent on choosing a way to live that will demonstrate the way we feel and the way we know. Or as the Beatles put it, boomers were content to say, and they want a revolution. If inside their heads they had already succeeded, outside they had barely started. When the tempest of the awakening began to calm, aspects of life boomers had once deemed spiritually empty, consumption, careerism, family formation, were now temptingly available, having at last been resacralized by their new values. Older and younger generations guffawed at their pick and choose idealism, but boomers were too focused on their own drummer to notice what others thought. Where Snoopy and Woodstock had once plumbed the inner life of youth, they now were captioned, "Get met, it pays." Todd Gitlin recalls how, as the awakening neared its end, it was time to go straight, from marijuana to white wine, from hip communes to summers on Cape Cod. Boomers couldn't forever linger in a state of suspended animation. By now, this generation had come to believe in the credo of the whole earth catalog. We are gods and might as well get good at it.
Wow. So earlier in the chat, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, said millennials aren't the hero, Gen Z is the hero. Now, maybe, but that would be very interesting, because the way that this in the construct of this book and what hero means in this book, it's one of the archetypes of a generation. We're not saying who the biggest heroes are, like outside of the construct of the book. It would be interesting if the millennial generation skipped, was an extension of the nomad archetype of the 13er generation, Gen X, or wasn't anything. It wouldn't be unprecedented, because that is the anomaly of the model that's found after the Civil War in this book, is that the Civil War era produced no hero archetype. If what you're saying or suggesting is true, and the book doesn't take a position except to say, when it talks about millennial generation hero ? Because they were still being born at the time the book was written. If they're not the hero, if they're nothing, or some extension of the nomad, that would be interesting to me, in that it mirrors the Civil War era anomaly.
The Civil War era anomaly?
Yeah, in the book they say that the Civil War is an anomaly to the saeculum always doing what it does, because the Civil War era did not produce a hero archetype.
Oh, okay.
And if that's true, it would mean that the millennial generation is not a hero archetype similar to post-Civil War, which I'm not saying is true. I think the millennial generation is a hero archetype. The artist generation is Gen Z would be the artist generation coming in this current term, where all four archetypes are present in the generational constellation.
Okay.
Okay.
I can get into that.
13ers. Entering childhood. Rosemary's Baby. Delightful. Amid the gathering turbulence of 1964, baby making abruptly fell out of favor. In the spring of that year, American women were still giving birth at a record pace, but in the months that followed, conceptions plummeted. And by mid-1965, the U.S. fertility rate was entering its steep post-boom decline. A national fertility study confirmed that a third of all mothers now admitted having at least one unwanted child. Holy shit. Stay-at-home mom. No wonder Gen X is so fucked up. Their parents openly admitted to magazines that they weren't wanted. A national unwanted child. Stay-at-home moms began wearing buttons that read "Stop at 1, none is fun, and Jesus was an only child." The reasons for this sudden turn included birth control pills, nascent feminism, and a new society-wide hostility toward children. America's new anti-child attitude revealed itself most clearly in the media. By the mid-1960s, the production of smart kid family sitcoms and creative kid Disney movies slowed to a trickle. Replacing them was a new genre featuring unwanted, unlikable, or simply horrifying children. Rosemary's Baby, a thriller about a woman pregnant with an evil demon, anchored a 20-year period in which Hollywood film one bad kid movie after another. The Exorcist, It's Alive, The Omen, Halloween. Most came with sequels since audiences couldn't seem to get enough of these cinematic monsters. Moviegoers also lined up to see kids who were savages, Lord of the Flies, hucksters, Paper Moon, prostitutes, Taxi Driver, emotional misfits, Ordinary People, spoiled brats, Willy Wonka, and barriers to adult self-discovery, Kramer versus Kramer. Meanwhile, Hollywood made far fewer films for children. The proportion of G-rated films fell from 41% to just 13%, and the new R-rated films soon became Hollywood's most profitable. Disney laid off cartoonists for the only time in its history. Throughout the 13ers' childhood era, the adult media battered their collective reputation and, over time, began to portray this generation as having absorbed the negative message. "We're rotten to the core," sang the preteen thug boys and Bugsy Malone. "We're the very worst, each of us contemptible, criticized, and cursed." As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Brian just entered the chat. Teenagers began repeating this line, as when one student mockingly tells his friends in River's Edge, quote, "You young people are a disgrace to all living things, to plants even. You shouldn't even be seen in the same room as a cactus." America's new consciousness celebrated childhood as an ideal, but it neglected childhood as an actual living experience. The nation moved from what Leslie Fieldler called a 1950s era cult of the child to what Landon Jones called the 1970s era cult of the adult. With older GIs still smarting from attacks by their own kids, with the silent now reconsidering their high era family choices, and with fertile boomers taking voyages to the interior, the very image of more children provoked widespread anxiety. Parents were shunned if they tried to bring small children into restaurants or theaters. Many rental apartments started banning children. The ascendant zero population growth movement declared each extra child to be pollution, a burden on scarce resources. Sacrificing one's own career and conjugal happiness for the sake of kids became passé, even by the logic of the era, for bad kids themselves. A flurry of popular books chronicled the resentment, despair, and physical discomfort women now said they endured when bearing and raising 13er children. As the cost of raising a child became a hot topic, adults ranked autos ahead of children as a necessity for a good life. The abortion rate skyrocketed. By the late 1970s, would-be mothers aborted one fetus in 3.
Jesus.
In Ourselves and Our Children, a committee of silent authors ranked considering yourself ahead of benefiting our children as a principle of sound parenting. Parental guides began emphasizing why to-dos over what to-dos. The popular parental effectiveness training urged adults to teach small tots about consequences rather than about right and wrong. As Marie Wynn noted, an early childhood determinism enabled parents to assume their kids could cope with later trauma, given how carefully they had been tended as tots. Thus reassured, awakening era parents spent 40% less time on child raising than parents had spent in the high. The awakening's casual sex, non-traditional families, and mind-altering drugs left a large imprint on this child generation, an imprint reflected in much of today's 13er music and prose. In the late 1960s, sings Susan Werner, there were some people smoking weed and there were other people doing speed, but I was way big into raisins at the time. Quote, I remember wallpapering my younger brother's room with Playboy centerfolds, recalls Adrian Jenick. I remember bongs and pipes and art and music among my parents' greatest artifacts, and my mother's vibrator, and reading my father's penthouse forums. As novelist Ian Williams writes, we could play truth or dare with our parents' sex lives if we wanted to. Gross. Ugh. By the late 1970s, once 13ers began practicing what they had learned, adults grew accustomed to seeing kids dress and talk as knowingly as Brooke Shields in ads or Jodie Foster in film. As the media standard for the typical American family changed from my 3 sons to my 2 dads, divorce struck 13ers harder than any other child generation in U.S. history. Where boomers had once been worth the parental sacrifice of prolonging an unhappy marriage, 13ers were not. At the end of the high, half of all adult women believed that as parents in bad marriages should stay together for the sake of the children. But by the end of the awakening, only 1 in 5 thought so. Best-selling youth books like It's Not the End of the World tried to show that parental divorce wasn't so bad, but left children with the impression that any family could burst apart at any time. In The Nurturing Father, Journey Toward the Complete Man, Kyle Pruitt promised that a family dissolution freed parent and child to have better and less constricted time together. By 1980, just 56% of all 13er children lived with 2 once married parents. And today, this generation's novels and screenplays bristle with hostile references to parents who didn't tough it out. Polls have since shown 13ers far more inclined than older Americans to believe current divorce laws are too lax. You know, the focus on, you know, TV and movies and culture of kids, you don't want kids are a problem, kids are pollution, kids are that, like, when you think about what they're doing to kids in school today, and not just in school, but in the culture, in the different media that kids, it's with like the trans stuff and the LGBTQ2 plus IA, whatever, more broadly, this I think shows that level of media propagandizing on a young generation shapes it forever. It shapes who they are as a generation and how they interact with the world. It's what happened to boomers, right? We just watched that, and now we're watching it again.
Yep. In
homes, schools, and courtrooms, America's style of child nurture completed a 2-decade transition from Father Knows Best to Bill Cosby's fatherhood. Quote, was I making a mistake now? If so, it would just be a mistake. It would just be mistake number 9,763. If anything has changed in the last generation, Ellen Goodman later admitted, it was the erosion of confidence and among openly uncertain mothers and fathers. Alvin Poussaint noted the dominant media image of parents as pals who were always understanding. They never get very angry. They are no boundaries or limits set. Parents are shown as bungling, not in charge, floundering as much as the children. Parents who admit they are many-dimensioned, imperfect human beings, reassured ourselves and our children, are able to give children a more realistic picture of what being a person is all about. At best, the new model parents were like Cosby's Cliff Huxtable, gentle and communicative. At worst, they undermined trust and expressed ambivalence where children sought guidance. Like father and son in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, adults became more childlike and children more adult-like. This anti-authoritarian nurture fit the iconoclastic mood of the awakening. Older generations went out of their way to tell children, in words of Mads Al Feldstein, that there's a lot of garbage out in the world and you've got to be aware of it. Silent parents, recalling their own closeted crisis era childhood, were especially eager to expose their kids to everything. Judy Blume exhorted parents to expose their children to every possible human catastrophe. They live in the same world we do, she insisted. She and other silent authors launched a new realism bookshelf for children, targeting subjects like abortion, adolescent cohabitation, child abuse, family friend rapists, and suicide that prior child generations had never encountered. After absorbing the books, movies, and TV shows the awakening era culture offered them, and after observing adults carefully and emulating how they behave, many 13ers began resembling Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon, the kind of kid adults have a hard time finding adorable. The events of the awakening reinforced the impression that grown-ups were neither powerful nor virtuous. To the child's eye, adults were simply not in control, either of their own personal lives or during the years of Vietnam, Watergate, and gas lines of the larger world. Instead of preventing danger or teaching by example, adults were more apt to hand out self-care guides that told kids about everything that might happen and how to handle it on their own. As Neil Postman observed in The Disappearance of Childhood, 13er children were given answers to questions they never asked. It was an era in which everyone and everything had to be liberated, whether it was good for them or not. In Escape from Childhood, John Holt urged freeing children from the vice of adult oppression, while Hillary Clinton published articles on children's rights. Nowhere were 13er children liberated more than in awakening era schools, where high era education now stood accused of having dehumanized little boomers. Each child should be left to himself without adult suggestion of any kind, urged open education advocate A.S. Neal, who suggested that facts and rules and grades and walls be replaced with tools and clay and sports and theater and paint and freedom. Reformers tried to boost child self-esteem through person-centered education that stressed feelings over reason, empirical experience over logical deduction. Rather than ask students to evaluate a book's universal quality or message, teachers began probing students about how a reading assignment made them feel. Grammar was downplayed, phonics frowned upon, arithmetic decimals replaced by the relativistic parameters of new math. Textbooks emphasized sensitivity and accessibility. Standards were weakened in line with reformer Roland Barthes' theory that there is no minimum body of knowledge which it is essential for everyone to know. The average time children spent on homework fell to half of what it had been in the high era, and grade inflation ran rampant. As the awakening era progressed, the percentage of high school graduates who described themselves as straight A students nearly tripled. Back in the high, being a good adult meant staying married and providing children with the wholesome culture and supportive community. Now it meant festooning the child's world with self-esteem, smiley buttons, while the fundamentals and media image of child's life grew more troubled by the year. Increasing numbers of children were born to unmarried teen mothers, while underfunded foster home systems buckled in state after state. The media began referring to latchkey, abandoned, runaway, and throwaway kids. In the middle 1970s, the distinction of occupying America's most poverty-prone age bracket passed directly from the elder lost to the child 13th without ever touching the three generations in between. By the late 1970s, the child suicide rate broke the lost previous turn of the century record. Through the awakening, the homicide rate ran for infants and small children rose by half, and the number of reported cases of child abuse jumped fourfold. The awakening's new hostility of power, authority, and secrecy had once had one meaning for 45-year-olds seeking a nuanced view of a complicating world, but another for 10-year-olds trying to build dreams. For the silent, taught to think big as crisis-era children, thinking small was a midlife tonic. But never having had their own chance to think big, the pre-adolescent 13ers heard a new message. America's best days were over. Like the child of divorce writ large, this generation wondered if it was only a coincidence that they came along at just the moment in history when older people started complaining about everything in America was falling to pieces. Ask today's young adults how they were raised, and many will tell you that they raised themselves, that they made their own meals. This is 1997 young adults. That they made their own meals, washed their own clothes, decided for themselves whether to do homework or make money after school, and chose which parent to spend time with on weekends or side with in court. They grew up less as family members of family teams, looking forward to joining adult teams, than as free agents, looking forward to dealing and maneuvering their way through life's endless options. In their childhood memory, the individual always trumped the group. during the consciousness revolution, as older generations stripped away the barriers that had previously sheltered childhood, 13ers were denied a positive vision of the future, denied, indeed, any reassurance that their nation had any collective future at all.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah. All right, read the last page.
Nuclear family. All right. Yeah, we're running out of time. Toward the third turning in 1983, a 20th anniversary march on Washington drew roughly as many participants as had come to hear King's epic speech at the end of the high. Yet the old wistfulness had been replaced by a new sense of consolidation, as if some giant museum should now be built to memorialize the dream and the movement. The time for grand social movements had passed. That same year also produced heightened public alarm over the deadly AIDS virus. The days of euphoric experimentation had taken a grim turn. America would see no more wild oscillations between utopian and dystopian visions of the future. That was not because the awakening had subsided, but because it had triumphed. By the early 1980s, the anti-institutional shouts that had originated in the pot-laced dronings of hate Ashbury hippies could be heard in the free market chatter of the Wall Street brokers and Main Street merchants. From coast to heartland, inner city to the edge of the city, Americans everywhere were listening to what Habits of the Heart co-author Steve Tipton described as their own little church in their own little mind. By the end of Reagan's first term, the awakening had run its course. A new agenda had been set, and the old enthusiasm could not last. Each generation now filled the phase of life it had spent the prior 2 decades entering, and each was about to break ground into the next. As was the case around 1963, none of the generational archetypes showed signs of matching the role its predecessor had carried out in the prior era. How could the silent project anywhere near the hubris of the aging conquerors, building their great society and demanding their entitlement? How could the boomers possibly emerge as midlife mediators, looking beyond themselves for procedural solutions? How could 13ers come of age preaching about moral perfection? How could American parents tolerate yet another underattended child generation? None of them had any chance of happening. Toward the end of any awakening, generational strains begin to show. The elder heroes, still leading institutions while vacating the culture, now worry about a society whose new spiritualism they find alien. The midlife artists, sensing that the old order has been repudiated, now plan to cast off community discipline and expand the realm of personal choice. The young adult prophets, inspired by the discovery of personal truth, now want to change society from the inside out. The child nomads, cynical youths, in a world of powerless adults, learn to distrust the rules and prepare to make their own way. By the early 1980s, these generational archetypes were all primed for new directions. When the silent began edging the elderhood, boomers into midlife, and 13ers into young adulthood, their prior social roles could not continue. The awakening was over. As Roland Stromberg had predicted in the middle 1970s, eventually the mood of that era, quote, will be revealed as simply one more exhausted option, and so a new one will have to be invented, end quote. The second turning necessarily had to give way to the third.
All right.
Go.
So the next chapter that we start next week is chapter 8, The Third Turning, Culture Wars, 1984 to 2005, or an examination of Brian's childhood.
There we go. And we do have a couple Rumble rants. I will pull those up real quick, and then we got to rush out of here.
I have them if you want me to read them.
I got them pulled up. Missy Brash, as someone born mid-boomer 1955, we girls were raised on June Cleaver and Carol Brady. Take care of the home and kids. By our 30s, it was get a job because he may leave and we don't need men anyway.
Yeah, and like when then the next phase off of that was, you can do it all. You can be the CEO. You can, you can take all of the jobs that the men are doing, and the stuff that they want you to do at home, that's just to oppress you.
There you go. And now I also think that there's factions throughout the United States that were resistant to these turnings, and,
Sure.
cultures and stuff that were resistant, but ultimately broadly, I get it. Peyton, and thank you, Missy Brash. Peyton Pooh, love that Ash and Brian do this. My eye is tired after work. Learning how to create over here too. Badlandia for life. Hope to call in again on Flow with Cam on Saturday. Always late to the game.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. And yeah, good to see you. And
to your point about, people that were resistant to the archetype of their generation, I think that's true throughout, right? You've got the people that swim against the stream. You've got the people that deviate, but it's the view of kind of the collective of that generation in that specific turning is X. And of
Yeah,
course, there's going to be people that resist.
I wonder what the theme I brought up over and over throughout this book so far is, does the advancements in technology and interconnectedness through the internet and everything else, does that make us more susceptible to conformity, or does it make us more resistant to it?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I think it makes it easier for central planners and central controllers to ride the saculum and manipulate certain events and things to their ends, certainly.
Manufacture consensus.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Ash. Yeah, Ash and I will be on Badlands Daily tomorrow. We're actually gonna have a guest on for the first segment in the morning, talking about Section 230. So I'll get up with you. It's Jason Fick is going to be joining us to talk about Section 230. He's an attorney.
Any relation to Alan or Robin?
No, Fick, F-Y-K.
Oh,
is it Fick or Fike? It might be Fike.
I have no idea, but I thought you said Fick, and I thought it would be fun if Robin Thicke was on to sing that song, that one-hit wonder song.
Alan Thicke was better than Robin Thicke.
Alan Thicke was, talking about the inspirational, Growing Pains, right? Was it Growing Pains?
Growing Pains, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Growing Pains.
Psychiatrist in the home office that was always there for his kids.
I know they tried Full House, Family Matters, Growing Pains, around the Cosby Show. Like they tried step by step, they tried so hard to bring it back. And all right, guys, we got to get out of here. What's up next?
Hit the like. Next is Brad and Abby. It's going on now. We'll raid over there. And after that is Story Hour, followed by DEF CON 0. So stay tuned to Badlands. And please, please, please hit that like button for us.
Take care, guys.
Deodorant should do more than cover you up. It should protect you all day long.
Dude, the deodorant stick is legit. I like the mint one. And, you go work out and you kind of get you get funky if you work out. Dude, at the end of my workout, I'm sweating, shirt got all those sweat. I'm like, dude, I still smell good. I absolutely love it. If you guys haven't tried it, try it.
That's the difference with Soft Disclosure. No aluminum, no chemicals, just clean, natural ingredients that fight odor and keep you fresh through every workout, every meeting, every moment.
I've always struggled with the you can't use aluminum deodorant because you're going to die if you use it kind of thing, because all of the non-aluminum deodorant products suck pretty much. This is different. This is all day. You're all day good, and you're not putting any of that disgusting chemicals right near your lymph nodes.
Soft Disclosure deodorant, real protection, real freshness, built on truth. Available in mint and lemon grapefruit. Visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code Badlands for 15% off.
Soft Disclosure.